Well, tonight's story that I want to share with you is one of my favorite Christmas stories. It's called The True Meaning of Crumfest. And you'll see that it's about Crumfest, but it's also about Christmas. And you'll see as we go. You can see the pictures in my book, but you can also see them on the wall. This is the story of Eckhart, a young mouse with quick, tiny feet, shiny black eyes, and an extra long tail. He lived with his family in a place called Rose Valley in Prince Edward Island. It is also the story of a very great mystery, a mystery which all the mice in Rose Valley talked about, but which was never solved until the day Eckhart set off on his great adventure. It was the day he went boldly where no mouse had gone before and discovered the true meaning of Crumfest. For Eckhart and the other mice, every year was divided into two parts, the outside part and the inside part. During the long warm days, they lived in a snug burrow beneath a spruce tree in the corner of a field next to the woods. But when the days became shorter and the great snows came, they left outside and moved inside, between the walls of the big white farmhouse where the people lived. The mice, of course, didn't refer to them as people. They called them the straight ones because they walked up straight. Eckhart didn't like the idea of going inside. None of the mice did. The narrow space between the walls where they would spend the winter was a cold, dismal place. There was no grass there, or trees, or flowers, and no sunshine. The inside was also a hungry place. There was plenty of food there, but at night, the only time it was safe to go searching, it was almost always shut up in the little pantry off the kitchen, in jars or tins with tight covers. The only place the mice could find food was on the kitchen floor, beneath the big wooden table where the people ate. There would usually be a few crumbs there, tiny bits of bread or biscuits which had tumbled down from above. But there was one time of the year when all that changed. Every year in late December, just a few weeks after the mice had moved inside, a most astonishing thing happened. Suddenly, as if by magic, there were crumbs everywhere. For several days, the mice feasted not just on bread or biscuits, but on cake and cookies and pie crusts. The mice had a name for this time of abundance. They called it Crumfest. And over the years, it became the most important celebration in mouse history. Merry Crumfest, they would call out to one another as they scurried in and out of their hole, bringing back load after load of tiny morsels. The young mice, like Eckhart, who had been born outside during the summer, had only heard stories about Crumfest, so they looked forward to it with the most unbearable excitement. "Is it really as crummy as they say?" Eckhart asked his mother. "Oh, yes, dear," she would answer. "It's the crummiest time of the whole year." Eckhart's grandfather, a skinny, bent old mouse named Thomas, had lived longer than any of the other mice. He had celebrated 3 Crumfests, and Eckhart asked him once why it happened every year. Old Thomas said he didn't know. He said it was a mystery. When Eckhart asked him a second time, he twitched his tail in annoyance. "Don't ask so many questions," he said crossly. "Crumfest happens. That's all there is to it. Just be thankful. Don't waste your time trying to know things that mice can never know." "I'm warning you, Master Eckhart," he added in a serious voice. "If you ask too many questions, you may just ruin it for yourself and everybody else." Eckhart felt puzzled and hurt. He didn't like to upset his grandfather, but he was just not satisfied with the old mouse's answer. You see, Eckhart was a curious mouse. The truth is, Eckhart had some doubts about Crumfest. He thought maybe it was just a story the old mice had made up to help pass the time during the long, dark inside days. He once told his little sister Mavis that there was no such thing as Crumfest, and she burst into tears. "Eckhart," she sobbed, "you are a hateful, horrid brother." But then one day, just when Eckhart was beginning to feel certain that he was right, the crumbs appeared. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. The word spread quickly between the walls. "They've arrived! They've arrived! The crumbs are here!" Eckhart had never seen such excitement. Everyone was happy. Even Thomas, who hardly ever seemed happy, was in a good mood. But all of that just made Eckhart even more curious. On the second day of Crumfest, he sat chewing on a big sticky raisin, and he started thinking about the reason for this event. Right there and then, he decided he must solve the riddle. He made up his mind to go exploring. When he told some of the other mice about his intentions, they looked at him in astonishment, and his friend Martin told him he was crazy. Everyone said it was just too dangerous. Old Thomas dropped his head and muttered, and it seemed that he'd forgotten all about Eckhart and was talking to himself, but he said, too risky, too dangerous. But without saying a word, Eckhart left the old mouse and scurried in the hole in the wall and out into the kitchen. It was the middle of the night and the room was dark, but there was a moon outside and it shone through the windows. It was very quiet. Not a creature was stirring. Except Eckhart. He crept beneath the wooden table, and this was familiar territory. He paused for a moment to decide where he would go from there. He looked across the room, saw a door leading into a hallway, and beyond that, the unknown. Perhaps out there was the secret of Crumfest. He knew he had to go there. And as he passed through the doorway, he could feel his heart pounding. He moved slowly at first, but then scampered across the mat to another doorway. He peered inside, twitching his nose. In front of him was a wide room with a shiny floor, and there was a very large object near the door, something he'd never seen before. He scampered underneath and poked his head out the other side. Eckhart could scarcely believe his eyes. He blinked and looked again, but sure enough, it was there. It was a fir tree. A beautiful green tree from the outside was right there on the inside.
It's a Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm. Eckhart ran over quickly and looked up into the branches. There on the tree were other things from outside. There was a string of red berries. They didn't and there were some birds, which didn't look exactly like the birds he'd seen outside, but they were definitely birds, sitting very still in the branches. And it was all very surprising and strange, and something told Eckhart that it must have something to do with Crumfest, though he wasn't sure what. There was a small table beside the tree, and Eckhart climbed up to get a better view. He ran quickly up the legs, and when he came over to the top, there was another great surprise waiting for him. There, gathered in a circle, were tiny animals from the outside. There were 2 cows, a horse with long ears, and several sheep. There were also some tiny people there, and right in the middle, a little box with a baby sleeping in some straw. Eckhart walked over slowly and stood beside one of the sheep, which was just exactly the same size as he was. He remained there quietly for a few moments, standing just as still as the other animals. And that's when it happened. Eckhart felt something he'd never felt before. It started somewhere inside him and spread out at the very tips of all his whiskers and at the end of his extra long tail. It wasn't exactly astonishment. It wasn't exactly joy. It was wonder. That's what it was. Eckhart felt wonderful. It only lasted a short time, but he knew in that moment that he'd discovered the meaning of Crumfest. It came to him in a flash, and he knew his journey was over. It was now time to go back to the other mice and tell them his story. So he scampered down to the floor. With one last look at the tree, he ran quickly across the shiny floor, under the large object, out through the door, across the mat, through the other door, under the great table where the crumbs were, and into the hole in the corner.
Huh?
That's where he lives. When he arrived back between the walls, the other mice could tell immediately that something sensational had happened. Eckhart had been away half an hour,
What?
which is quite a long time for a mouse. And he looked different. Soon they were all gathered around him. "Where have you been?" they asked. "What have you seen?" Even Grandfather Thomas looked especially interested, and he came close enough to hear. Eckhart told them the story of his journey. He told them about the big room, the tree, the berries, the birds, and when he got to the part about the animals, he lowered his head, straightened his tail, and said softly, "The mystery of Crumfest is the mystery of the outside and the inside. When the outside comes in and the inside comes out, it's a special time." because that's when the outside and the inside meet. And when they do, Crumfest happens. That's interesting, huh? For a moment, no one spoke. Most of the mice looked confused, like you guys right now. And Thomas scowled, but there were a few whose eyes opened very widely, as though they had just heard a secret that they already knew. In the years that followed, the telling and retelling of Eckhart's tale became an important part of the Crumfest celebrations. Most of the mice still didn't go farther than the crumbs beneath the table. But there were a few who followed Eckhart's trail through the doorway. And like Eckhart, they experienced for themselves the mystery of Crumfest, the wonder of a place where the inside and the outside are together. The end. It was a Christmas tree. So Eckhart really has a really great explanation of Crumfest. He says when the outside and the inside come together. Does that happen at Christmas time too? Does the outside ever come inside?
Yeah.
Do you have a tree?
Yeah.
That's an outside thing that comes inside. I want to ask you one more question. Where do you feel love? Inside of you? Do you feel it in your body? Yeah, that's a great thing to feel inside your body. What happens when that comes out? What happens when it comes out of your body? What does it look like? What does love look like when it comes out of you? A heart? Yeah. What else? Happiness? Gasping. That's a good one. How do you show someone like your mom or your dad or your grandparents or someone close to you, how do you show them your love? Hugging. Good one. Any other way? I heard someone make a kissy noise. Yes, we can kiss. That's a way to show that we love someone. There's lots of ways that we show. Even a smile can show that we love someone. It lets the inside out. The love on the inside comes out. And we show it by the many kind things we do for one another. And Christmas is a time when that love that's on our inside has a chance to come out in very special ways. So I think Eckhart is right. Crumfest and Christmas is about the inside and the outside coming together when we share love with one another, and we show what that is when we let it out of us. So I hope Christmas can be that for all of us. We can let the love out of our hearts and out of our bodies and into the world. It's what Crumfest and Christmas is all about. So Merry Christmas to you all. And Merry Crumfest too. I hope you get lots of crumbs. We remember Luke's version of the Christmas story. The angel Gabriel came to a young woman in Nazareth named Mary. The angel told her that she was going to have a child. In the midst of her fear and confusion, Mary traveled to the hill country and spent time with her relatives, Elizabeth and Zechariah. Elizabeth was also expecting a child that came as a surprise to her and her husband in the later years of their marriage. Around that time, the emperor sent an order that everyone be counted in a census. Everyone went to their ancestral town to register. Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem, the city of David, because they were descendants of King David. While they were there, the time came for Mary to have her baby, and she gave birth to a son. She wrapped him in clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them to stay in the inn. There were shepherds in the fields near Bethlehem, taking care of their flocks that night. An angel appeared to them, and they were terribly afraid. But the angel said, "Do not be afraid, for I am here with good news of great joy for all people. This very night a child is born. God's anointed has come." Suddenly a whole company of angels appeared to the shepherds, singing praises and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth let there be peace and goodwill for all people." After the angels went away, the shepherds went quickly to Bethlehem, and they found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. When they saw this, they told everyone what the angels had made known to them. But Mary pondered all these things in her heart. And when the time came, they traveled to Jerusalem to make their offering in the temple before returning north to Nazareth.
We have a second birth story from the first century in Matthew's Gospel. Joseph was engaged to a woman named Mary when he discovered that she was expecting a child. As he considered his options, an angel came to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary to be your wife. She'll give birth to a son, and you'll name him Jesus, and he will deliver his people from their oppression." When Joseph awoke, he decided to proceed with the marriage plans. After they were married, Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the time when Herod was king. Those who studied stars came from the east. They asked at the palace, "Where is the one to be born a king? We've seen his star and have come to worship him." After consulting his advisors, King Herod sent them to Bethlehem. On the way, they saw the star again, and it went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was staying. When they went into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They knelt down and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. After being warned in a dream of the coming dangers, the Magi returned home by another way. Soon after that, Joseph also received a message in a dream that his family had reason to be afraid because Herod was looking for the child. Joseph fled to Egypt with Mary and the baby and stayed there until after the king had died, and it was safe to return to their home in Nazareth again. These are legends about the birth of Jesus of Nazareth passed down to us from writings late in the first century. And from the contemporary poet Mary Oliver in her poem, To Begin With, The Sweetgrass, which comes from her collection of poetry called Evidence. All I can tell you is what I know. Look and look again. The world is not just a little thrill for the eyes. It's more than bones. It's more than the delicate wrist with its personal pulse. It's more than the beating of a single heart. It's praising. It's giving until the giving feels like receiving. You have a life. Just imagine that. You have this day, and maybe another, and maybe still another. We do one thing or another. We stay the same, or we change. Congratulations if you've changed. Let me ask you this. Do you also think that beauty exists for some fabulous reason? And if you've not been enchanted by this adventure, your life, what would do for you? I have become the child of the clouds and of hope. I've become the friend of the enemy, whoever that is. I've become older, and cherishing what I have learned, I've become younger. And what do I risk to tell you all this, which is all I know? Love yourself, then forget it. Then love the world. These are the words of a contemporary poet. This is peak season for traveling. Highways are busy, airports are crowded, buses are full. It's one of the well-observed traditions in this season that many of us will travel to family and friends. Others will travel to escape our northern winter. And still others will travel to memories of Christmases past. We pay attention to forecasts, and we hope there are no travel advisories in effect as we set out. In the United States alone, more than 95 million people are expected to travel during the Christmas season. And the stories that give us this season are tales of travel. Whether it's Santa making his travels from the North Pole to every household, or it's the first century birth stories we remember tonight. The stories that shape this season are stories of travel. The storyteller Matthew gives us the tale of exotic foreigners with their very unique baby gifts. And then along comes another ancient storyteller, Luke, to introduce us to sleep-deprived parents, smelly shepherds, singing angels. And these two entirely different casts of characters would seem to have nothing in common. But each of these very different birth stories are entirely, almost entirely populated with travelers. The traveling begins even before the child is born, when Luke has Mary travel to the hill country to meet her cousin Elizabeth. And that's the beginning of a pattern that makes pilgrims of all these characters. In the world of Luke's story, parents will travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Shepherds will come in and journey from the hills into town. The parents will take their newborn into Jerusalem from Bethlehem before they return north to Nazareth. In Matthew's story, foreigners will travel from the east to one of Herod's palaces in Jerusalem and then journey to Bethlehem. They'll go home by a new and undescribed route. And then the young family will travel from Bethlehem into Egypt as refugees from the cruel regime of Herod, to return a few years later from Egypt to Nazareth after the king has died. Perhaps it's the pilgrim nature of these stories that lend themselves to our pageantry. Maybe we reenact these stories again and again to locate ourselves within our own story. Our reenactment, whether it's by retelling this story year after year, or unpacking our manger scenes and setting out our figurines, or dressing ourselves in badly matched fabrics with tea towels on our heads, or donning those old plush bathrobes and carrying empty boxes wrapped in gold or silver foil. We merge these two totally different narratives into a cohesive story that never happened quite that way, but is a story that is always happening in a myriad of ways. Sometimes we find ourselves in the trusting young mother, birthing new life against all odds. Sometimes we find ourselves in the reluctant father, seeking the courage to be misunderstood, to rise to the occasion, to protect what's at risk. Sometimes we find ourselves in those disoriented strangers, second-guessing ourselves, losing our way until reverence finds us and sets us on a path we've never walked before. And sometimes we find ourselves among the messengers, among those who have the strength and capacity to support and reassure others. Sometimes we're the hopeful voice, breaking through the overcast skies of someone's heart, seeing possibilities they can't see. Sometimes we're aware of the bigger picture, seeing beyond the moment like the angels, able to sing our praise of life even amid its trouble and its beauty. And sometimes we find ourselves in the shepherds, those who are scared to death by life, longing to overcome our fear and be apprehended by wonder. Sometimes we find ourselves opening to our curiosity and able to let our feet follow our heart, where we can experience the miracle of living. Or maybe we're the one in the manger this time. Maybe it's the miracle of life or coming back to life that's awakening in us. For surely we are somewhere in this story each year. Somewhere among the colorful cast of characters who create this season for us year after year to remind us that this is not a story so much about the birth of a particular human being as it is the story about the journey of becoming human. The only characters in either of these stories who never walked a mile in their own sandals or anyone else's are Herod and his cronies. These privileged few are the only ones in these stories who never leave the comfort of home, who've lost touch with what it is to rely on the hospitality of strangers, to trust the compass of their intuition, or have had to flee to another country in the hope of a better life for themselves or their children. These armchair travelers are well served by the status quo, having never known or having forgotten what it is to be vulnerable, to be displaced, to be at the mercy of others. They're the ones in the story holed up in the palace library, imagining scenarios of threats and crafting policies to protect what they think belongs to them. Our reenactment of this story every year is our opportunity to have a look at how we're traveling. It's an opportunity to discard some of the baggage we've been carrying, to identify the burdens that we might share, to name the fears that are haunting our dreams, to open to the adventure, to give voice to our song, to recognize what we're giving life to or what's being born in us, where we're finding courage for the road we have to walk, or where we need to release our hold on something to be sure that we are truly travelers in this life, not just tourists visiting this world, to be enchanted by the adventure and become the child of the clouds and of hope, the friend of the enemy, whoever that is. Become older, cherishing what we've learned, to love ourselves and then get over it or get on with it and love the world. We're in this story tonight again to find ourselves, to reorient to the road that we need to continue our healing journey of becoming as truly human as that ancient teacher who, however and wherever he was born, lived a lifetime of being born. He lived a lifetime of being awakened to the depths of the kind of humanness that put flesh on words like, love your neighbor as yourself, love your enemies and pray for those who seek to harm you. We come to the manger every year as though to a mirror that calls us to our highest and best humanity. This is our time to consider where we are on the journey to becoming human and what we need to find here in the world of the story in order to keep being born, to continue being awakened. Tonight is a night for a travel advisory. Not an advisory about the hazards of traveling, but of the dangers of not traveling. So we circle this ancient story again to be sure that we leave the palace, to be certain that we leave home, that we trust the road, that we welcome newness, that we pack a bag full of courage, embrace change, accept gifts from strangers, make no advance reservations that would get in the way of being an unexpected guest to receive hospitality, and to remember that we don't get to retrace our steps. So in this stillness we now hold with each other, let's consider how we're traveling this Christmas.